Everyone told Elena Vance to scream. They told her to fight for the millions she helped build, to drag her husband's infidelity into the light, and to burn his reputation to the ground. But when the divorce papers slid across the mahogany desk, Elena didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even negotiate. She just signed. Her husband, Julian, thought her silence was submission. He thought he had won. He was wrong. Silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's the sound of a weapon loading. This is the story of the woman who walked away with nothing, only to return with the one thing money can't buy: power. The loudest sound in the world is the scratch of a fountain pen on thick, cotton-bonded paper when 3 lawyers are holding their breath. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Sterling Vance building smelled of lemon polish and aggressive cologne. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sprawled out in a grid of grey and glass, indifferent to the life being dismantled inside the room. Eleanor Vance sat with her hands folded in her lap. She wore a beige cashmere cardigan that had seen better days and no jewelry. Her ring finger was bare, leaving a pale, indented band of skin where a 3-carat solitaire had lived for 12 years. Across the table sat Julian. Julian Vance, the wunderkind of New York real estate, the man who had turned a mid-sized inheritance into an empire that reshaped the skyline. He was 42, looking 35, dressed in a navy bespoke suit that cost more than Elena's father had made in a decade. He was currently checking his watch, a subtle tick of his wrist that screamed impatience. Elena, Julian's lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Marcus Gower, spoke with a voice like oiled gravel. I want to ensure you understand the finality of this addendum. By signing this, you are waiving spousal support beyond the initial lump sum agreed upon in the prenuptial agreement, despite the significant growth of the marital assets during the union. Marcus paused, looking at her over his rimless glasses. He expected a fight. He was paid to crush fights. He looked almost disappointed that the sword he had sharpened wouldn't be swung. I understand, Eleanor said. Her voice was soft, devoid of tremor. Julian looked up from his phone. His eyes, a piercing, icy blue that had once made Elena feel like the only woman in the world, were now clouded with a mix of pity and annoyance. Look, Julian sighed, leaning forward. He clasped his hands on the mahogany table. I'm not trying to be the villain here. The lump sum, $2 million, is generous. You can buy a nice place in Connecticut. Start that gallery you used to talk about. I just want this done cleanly, for both our sakes. Generous. The word hung in the air, heavy with irony. Julian's net worth was hovering near $900 million. Elena had hosted the dinners where he closed deals, charmed the investors who found Julian too abrasive, and nursed him through the panic attacks in 2018 when the market dipped. She had been the soft velvet glove over his iron fist, but she didn't say that. She didn't mention the nights she spent alone while he was working late with his 24-year-old PR consultant, a woman named Sienna who sprayed vanilla perfume that lingered on Julian's collars. I know, Julian, Elena said, picking up the pen. You've always been generous. Julian blinked, surprised by the lack of venom. He had prepared for tears. He had prepared for screaming. He had even prepared a second offer, an extra $500,000 just to shut her up. But this silence, this passive acceptance, it unnerved him, but mostly it relieved him. She was weak. He had always suspected it. She was a beautiful ornament that had lost its shine, and she knew it. You really don't want to review the clause regarding the Hamptons estate? Marcus asked, frowning. Your counsel. My counsel is advised to let me sign, Elena said, glancing at her own lawyer, a young court-appointed novice who looked terrified to be in the same room as Marcus Gower. Elena touched the nib to the paper. Scritch, scritch, Elena Marie Vance. She put the pen down. Is that it? She asked. Julian let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for months. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. That's it. The house needs to be vacated by Friday. but take the weekend if you need it. I'm not a monster." "Friday is fine," Elena said, standing up. She was taller than people remembered, though she usually slouched to make Julian feel larger. Today, she stood straight. "Take care of yourself, Elle," Julian said, offering a hand. It was a reflex, a business gesture. Elena looked at his hand. Smooth, manicured, powerful. She didn't take it. She just nodded once, a short, sharp dip of her chin. "Goodbye, Julian." She walked out of the conference room, her loafers silent on the plush carpet. She didn't look back at the view. She didn't look back at the man she had loved for a third of her life. As the elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the Sterling Vance logo, Eleanor finally exhaled. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a bird trapped in a cage. Her hands shook, just slightly. She pulled a burner phone from her purse, a cheap plastic thing that clashed with her designer bag. She dialed a number she had memorized 12 years ago, a number she had promised herself she would never call. It rang twice. "Talk to me," a deep, male voice answered. No hello. He knew who it was. He was the only person who had the number. "It's done," Elena whispered. "I signed. I took the payout. I didn't fight for a cent more." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of ice clinking against glass. "He thinks he won," the voice said. It was a satisfied, predatory sound. "He thinks I'm weak," Elena corrected. "He thinks I'm nothing without him." "Good," the man said. "Let him enjoy his victory lap, Elena. Because when we walk into the Met next month, Julian Vance is going to realize that the $2 million he gave you wasn't a settlement. It was a down payment on his own destruction." Elena closed her eyes, leaning her forehead against the cool metal of the elevator wall. "I'm tired, Elias." "I know, darling," Elias Thorne said, his voice softening into something dangerous and tender. "Go to the safe house. Sleep. The silence is over. Now we start the noise." The penthouse on Park Avenue felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit dedicated to a life that no longer existed. It was vast, cold, and echoed with the ghostly resonance of parties past. Elena moved through the rooms with a roll of packing tape and a stack of cardboard boxes. She wasn't taking much. The prenuptial agreement, and the divorce decree she had just signed, stated that personal effects were hers, but furniture, art, and assets acquired by the primary earner remained with Julian. She packed her books. She packed the clothes she actually liked, the oversized sweaters, the worn jeans, and left the couture gowns Julian insisted she wear hanging in the walk-in closet like shed skins. She paused in the master bedroom. On the nightstand, there was a framed photo of them from their honeymoon in Como. They looked happy, or at least they looked perfect. Elena looked at her younger self in the photo, eyes wide, smile eager to please. She hated that girl. That girl had been so desperate to be loved that she had carved herself down to fit into the small space Julian Vance allowed for a wife. "You're too loud, Elle. Tone it down." "Don't bore them with your art history trivia, Elle. Just smile. Why can't you just be happy with what I give you?" She took the photo out of the frame. She didn't tear it. She simply flipped it over and wrote on the back, "Reference, Nutfroforto 92, Asset Inventory." She left it on the bed. The door to the penthouse opened. Eleanor stiffened. It was Thursday. Julian wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be in D.C. lobbying for zoning permits. "I thought you'd be gone by now." It wasn't Julian. Eleanor turned to see Sienna standing in the doorway. She looked impossibly young, her skin glowing with expensive serums and victory. She was wearing one of Julian's oversized shirts, belted at the waist, and high-heeled boots. She looked like a spread in a fashion magazine. "I have until Friday," Elena said, returning to her box of books. She forced her hands to remain steady. "Do not react. Silence is the weapon." Sienna walked into the room, running a finger along the dresser. She picked up a perfume bottle, Elena's signature scent, heavy with jasmine. and sniffed it, wrinkling her nose. "Julian said you didn't even cry," Sienna said, her voice high and scratchy. "He said it was weird, like you didn't care." "Is there a question there, Sienna?" "I just wanted to see you," Sienna admitted, dropping the perfume back onto the tray with a loud clatter. "I wanted to see the woman who could be married to a king for 12 years and walk away with a peasant's payout. Are you stupid? Or did you just never love him?" Elena slowly taped the box shut. Rip, smooth, pat. She turned to face the girl. Sienna was beautiful, yes, but she was also hungry. Elena recognized that hunger. It was the same hunger she had felt at 25. The hunger to be chosen by a powerful man, thinking that proximity to power would make you powerful too. "I loved him enough to lose myself," Elena said quietly, "and I was smart enough to know when to cut the limb to save the body." Sienna scoffed, crossing her arms. "He's going to propose to me, you know, once the waiting period is over. We're going to be a power couple, real partners, not whatever you were." Eleanor picked up her box. She walked toward the door, stopping inches from Sienna. She could smell the vanilla perfume. It smelled cloying, like candy left out in the sun. "Be careful, Sienna," Elena whispered. "The thing about being a trophy is that eventually the winner needs shelf space for a new one." She walked out of the bedroom, leaving Sienna standing in the middle of the expensive silence. Eleanor took the service elevator down to the garage. She bypassed the Mercedes and the Range Rover. Instead, she walked to the far corner where a nondescript grey Honda Civic was parked. It was a rental she had arranged 3 days ago. She threw the 2 boxes into the trunk. Driving out of the garage, she didn't turn toward Connecticut. She turned downtown. She drove past the gleaming towers of Midtown, down into the tangled streets of the Lower East Side, and finally across the bridge into Brooklyn. She parked in front of a converted warehouse in Red Hook. The air here smelled of salt water and diesel, not lemon polish. She keyed into the apartment on the 3rd floor. It was a loft, raw and industrial. Exposed brick, wide plank floors, huge iron-framed windows looking out over the grey water of the harbour. It was empty, save for a single leather armchair in the centre of the room and a man standing by the window. Elias Thorne turned around. If Julian Vance was a polished diamond, Elias Thorne was a jagged piece of obsidian. He was dark-haired, with grey at the temples, and a face that looked like it had been broken and put back together a few times. He wore a black turtleneck and dark jeans. He didn't look like a billionaire tech mogul who had revolutionized cybersecurity. He looked like a hitman. Elias had been Julian's college roommate. They had started Vance Thorne Corp together. Then, 10 years ago, Julian had pushed Elias out in a hostile boardroom coup that had left Elias with nothing but a grudge and a brilliant mind. Julian had taken the company, the credit, and the girl, Elena. Elena dropped her keys on the floor. Her legs gave out. She didn't hit the ground. Elias moved with a speed that defied his size, catching her before her knees touched the wood. He pulled her into him, his arms like steel bands wrapping around her shaking frame. "I did it," she sobbed into his chest, the dam finally breaking. "I walked away. I let him think I was nothing." "Shh," Elias murmured, his hand stroking the back of her head, tangling in her hair. "You're everything. You always were." "He has everything, Elias. The press, the board, the money." Elias pulled back, holding her face in his large, rough hands. His eyes were dark, burning with a decade of waiting. "He has the narrative, Elena, for now, but you have the files." Elena nodded, sniffing, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I have the ledger, the offshore accounts, the bribes to the zoning commission. I have all of it on the drive. And I have the platform to expose it," Elias said. "But we don't just leak it. That's too easy. That's messy. We destroy him in public," Elena said, her voice hardening. "We take away the one thing he cares about more than money." "His status," Elias finished. He walked over to a table where a sleek black box sat. He opened it. Inside lay a dress. It was a deep midnight blue velvet, structured and severe, yet incredibly sensual. It looked like armor made of night sky. "The Met Gala is in 3 weeks," Elias said. "The theme is rebirth. Julian is co-chair. He's bringing the girl." Elena reached out and touched the velvet. It was cold and soft. "I'm not invited," she said. "No," Elias smirked, a wicked, boyish expression that made him look 10 years younger. "Mrs. Julian Vance isn't invited, but the CEO of Thorn Dynamics and his guest, they have the top table." He looked at her, and for the first time in years, Eleanor didn't feel like a reflection of a man. She felt like the flame. "Are you ready to burn him down, Elle?" Eleanor looked from the dress to Elias. She thought of the pen scratching on the paper. She thought of Sienna in her bedroom. She thought of 12 years of being told to be quieter, smaller, softer. She smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "Pass me a drink, Elias. We have work to do. 3 weeks is a lifetime when you are reinventing yourself." In the Red Hook loft, time moved differently. It didn't tick by in the measured, sterilized increments of Julian's schedule: 7 a.m. gym, 8 a.m. breakfast, 8:30 a.m. briefing. Here, time was fluid, measured in cups of black coffee and the scrolling lines of code on Elias's monitors. Elena sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stacks of printouts. The files weren't just a simple smoking gun. They were a labyrinth of shell companies, inflated asset valuations, and zoning bribes. It was the architecture of Julian's empire, laid bare in black and white. "He's over-leveraged," Eleanor murmured, tracing a line on a spreadsheet with a highlighter. "The Hudson Yards project. He borrowed against the equity of the Midtown Tower, but the Midtown Tower is already collateral for the loans in Chicago." Elias was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with the precision of a surgeon. He paused, looking over his shoulder. "It's a Ponzi scheme of real estate, Elle. He's borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, hoping the market keeps rising so he never has to cash out. If the stock price dips below 40, he gets margin called," Elena said, her eyes widening as the math clicked into place. "And if he gets margin called, he loses everything. The banks seize the assets. The board ousts him. He's not just broke, he's criminally liable for fraud." Eleanor dropped the paper. She felt a wave of nausea, followed quickly by a cold, hard rush of adrenaline. She had signed those tax returns. She had hosted the galas that wooed the investors. She had been the unwitting face of a lie. "I helped him," she whispered. "I smiled and poured the wine while he built a castle on quicksand." Elias walked over, wiping his hands on a towel. He crouched down in front of her, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You didn't know, Elena. That's why he kept you in the dark. That's why he dismissed your questions about the business. It wasn't just misogyny, it was survival. If you knew, you would have stopped him. Julian needed a wife who was a decoration, not a partner." Elena looked at Elias. His face was hard, but his eyes were steady. He was the opposite of Julian in every way. Julian was a spotlight, Elias was the shadow. Julian needed to be adored, Elias needed to be understood. "Why are you doing this, Elias?" she asked. "You could have exposed him years ago. You have the tech." "Because it wasn't my kill," Elias said simply. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline. "He didn't just steal my company, Elena. He stole my life, but he broke you. And I knew that when you finally woke up. When you finally saw him for what he was, you would be the one to drive the dagger in. I'm just handing you the knife." The intimacy of the moment hung in the air, thick and electric. For 12 years, Elena had been faithful to a man who saw her as an accessory. Now, sitting on the floor of a warehouse with a man who looked at her like she was a nuclear weapon, she felt something dormant stirring in her chest. "The gala," she said, her voice steadying. "We don't just show up, We make a statement." "The dress is ready," Elias said, standing up and offering her a hand. "And I've arranged for the first leak to hit the financial blogs exactly at 8:12 p.m., right when appetizers are served." Elena took his hand. "Let's go see the armor." The dress was not just a piece of clothing, it was a psychological operation. Designed by an avant-garde Japanese designer Elias knew, it was a column of midnight blue velvet that swallowed the light. It had long sleeves, a high neck, and a back that plunged dangerously low. It was modest, yet scandalous, regal, yet threatening. When Eleanor stepped out of the dressing room in the loft, the silence was absolute. She looked in the mirror. She didn't see the frantic, pleasing wife of Julian Vance. She saw a woman who had survived the fire and decided to wear the ashes. Elias stood behind her, his reflection towering over hers. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, tailored to hide the holster he sometimes wore, though tonight his weapon was the woman on his arm. "You look—" Elias started, his voice rough. He cleared his throat. "You look like the end of the world." Elena turned to face him. She reached up and adjusted his bow tie, a gesture of familiarity that felt earned, not performed. "Good," she said. "Let's go start the apocalypse." The Metropolitan Museum of Art was a fortress of light. Flashbulbs popped in a staccato rhythm that sounded like gunfire. The red carpet was a river of blood and silk, flowing up the iconic steps. Julian Vance stood at the top of the stairs, the king of the mountain. He looked impeccable in Tom Ford, his smile practiced and dazzling. On his arm, Sienna looked like a confectionery dream in pink tulle. She was beautiful, undeniably, but she looked like a girl playing dress-up. She was fidgeting, checking her phone, glancing around nervously at the celebrities. "Stop checking your phone," Julian hissed through his smile, waving at a photographer. "You look insecure." "My strap is slipping," Sienna whispered back, her smile straining. "And I think that reporter from Vanity Fair just rolled her eyes at me." "You're paranoid. You're with me. That makes you royalty." Julian tightened his grip on her arm, a possessive squeeze that left a mark. He felt invincible. The stock was up. The divorce was signed. He had traded a 40-year-old wife for a 24-year-old model. He had won. "Mr. Vance, Mr. Vance, over here!" The paparazzi screamed his name. He basked in it. Then the screaming stopped. It didn't taper off. It was severed. A hush swept up the stairs, starting from the street level and rippling upward like a cold wind. Heads turned, cameras lowered, then raised again in a frenzy. Julian frowned. "What is it? Did Beyoncé arrive?" He looked down the stairs. A black town car had pulled up, not a limo, not an SUV, a sleek, matte black ghost of a car. The door opened. Elias Thorne stepped out first. The crowd murmured. Elias was an enigma, the reclusive tech billionaire who rarely left his fortress. His presence alone was a headline. But then he reached back into the car. Elena took his hand. She emerged, and the silence broke into a roar. She didn't smile. That was the first thing Julian noticed. Elena always smiled. She had a smile for the donors, a smile for the press, a smile for him. But this woman, her face was a mask of serene, terrifying calm. The blue velvet dress absorbed the camera flashes, making her look like a void in the center of the chaos. She wore no diamonds, no necklace, no earrings, just her bare neck, long and pale, and her dark hair slicked back. She looked severe. She looked powerful. She looked expensive, not in the way Sienna looked expensive, but in the way a masterpiece painting is expensive, untouchable. Is that your wife?" Sienna asked, her voice trembling. "Ex-wife," Julian corrected, but his voice lacked its usual authority. His heart skipped a beat, a nasty little thud of fear. Elena and Elias began to ascend the stairs. They moved in perfect sync, a binary star system of dark gravity. They didn't stop for interviews. They didn't wave. They simply walked, their eyes fixed on the top of the stairs, fixed on Julian. As they neared the top, the reporters grew frantic. "Eleanor, Eleanor, who are you wearing? Mr. Thorne, are you two together? Eleanor, do you have a comment on the divorce?" Eleanor didn't blink. She reached the top platform where Julian and Sienna stood blocking the entrance. For a moment, the four of them stood in a square of tension that felt dense enough to crack the pavement. Julian forced a laugh. It sounded brittle. "Elena, Elias, I didn't know you were acquainting yourselves." He looked at Elias with a mix of hatred and fear. He looked at Elena with confusion. He was waiting for her to shrink. He was waiting for her to look at the ground, to apologize for being there. Elena looked at Sienna. She didn't sneer. She offered a small, pitying smile. "Lovely dress, Sienna," Elena said. Her voice was low, smoky, audible only to them. "Pink is very youthful." Sienna flushed crimson. Then Elena turned her gaze to Julian. It was like opening a freezer door. "Hello, Julian." "You shouldn't be here, Elle," Julian muttered, stepping closer, trying to use his height to intimidate her. "This is a private event. You're embarrassing yourself." Elias stepped forward. He didn't touch Julian. He didn't have to. He just occupied the space between Julian and Eleanor, a physical wall of muscle and menace. "She's with me," Elias said. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in Julian's chest. "And unlike you, Julian, I actually own my company." Julian's eyes darted between them. The insult landed. "Is that supposed to be a threat?" Elena stepped around Elias. She leaned in close to Julian, close enough that he could smell the jasmine perfume he thought he had banished from his life. "It's not a threat, darling," she whispered, her lips brushing his ear. "It's a forecast." She pulled back, took Elias's arm, and swept past him into the museum. Julian stood frozen. The photographers captured the moment. Julian Vance, looking pale and small, staring after the woman he had discarded, who was now walking into his kingdom like she owned the deed. Inside the Temple of Dender, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of orchids and expensive champagne. The elite of New York were packed into the cavernous hall, a sea of tuxedos and gowns. Elena and Elias didn't take their seats immediately. They worked the room. This was the part Elena was good at. This was the part Julian had exploited for a decade. She knew the names of the wives. She knew whose son was in rehab, whose daughter just got into Yale, whose husband was sleeping with the nanny. She held the social map of Manhattan in her head, but tonight she wasn't smoothing feathers. She was plucking them. She approached the table of Arthur Sterling, the chairman of Julian's board. Arthur was a heavy-set man with a red face and a love for scotch. "Elena!" Arthur boomed, looking uncomfortable. He had sided with Julian during the divorce naturally. Money follows money. We didn't expect to see you." "I'm sure," Elena said, resting a hand on his shoulder. "I just wanted to say hello, Arthur, and to thank you." "Thank me?" Arthur blinked. "For the payout," Elena lied smoothly. "Cash is so king right now, especially with the liquidity issues I've been hearing about in the sector." Arthur frowned. "Liquidity issues? Vance Corp is posting record profits." Eleanor took a sip of water. "Of course. That's what the quarterly report said. But you know how Julian is with creative accounting. I'm just glad I got my cash out before the audit." She let the word hang there. "Audit. What audit?" Arthur asked, his voice dropping. "Oh, I shouldn't have said anything," Elena said, widening her eyes in mock innocence. "I'm sure it's nothing, just rumors. Enjoy the gala, Arthur." She walked away before he could ask another question. She glanced back to see Arthur immediately pulling out his phone. She moved to the next table, the wife of the zoning commissioner. "It's such a shame about the investigation," Elena whispered sympathetically. "Investigation?" the woman asked, clutching her pearls. "Into the permits for the seaport project." Julian told me he was worried your husband might get dragged into it. I just hope you have a good lawyer." Eleanor moved on. She was a ghost in the machine, moving from table to table, planting viral spores of panic, audit, fraud, investigation, insolvency. By the time the first course was served, tuna tartare with gold leaf, the room had changed. The boisterous laughter was dampened. People were whispering. Phones were lighting up under tables like fireflies. Julian sat at the head table, oblivious. He was laughing loudly at a joke made by the mayor. He had his hand on Sienna's knee. Then a notification pinged on a phone at the next table. Then another. Then 3 more. It was 8:01 p.m. Elias's leak had gone live. A prominent financial blog, The Ledger, had just published an article. Vance Corp, the billion-dollar house of cards. Leaked documents allege massive fraud. Elena watched from her table across the room. She saw Arthur Sterling check his phone. She saw the color drain from his face. She saw him look up, his eyes locking onto Julian with murderous intensity. Julian, sensing the shift in the room, finally looked down at his own phone, which had begun to vibrate incessantly on the table. Elena raised her glass of champagne. Across the room, Julian's eyes met hers. He read the headline. He looked at her, and for the first time in his life, Julian Vance looked terrified. Elena took a sip. It tasted like victory, but the night wasn't over. Elias leaned in close to her. "Phase 1 is complete," he murmured. "Now watch the rats start to eat each other." Sienna was pulling at Julian's sleeve. "Julian, what's going on? People are staring at us." "Shut up," Julian snapped, loudly enough for the mayor to hear. "Just shut up." Sienna recoiled, tears springing to her eyes. Elena stood up. "Where are you going?" Elias asked. "The ladies' room," Elena said calmly. "Sienna is going to run there to cry in about 30 seconds. I want to be there to hand her a tissue." This wasn't just about destroying Julian's business. It was about dismantling his control. Elena walked toward the restrooms, her velvet dress trailing behind her like a shadow, ready to offer the final mercy to the girl who had taken her place. The real gala was just beginning. The ladies' room at the Metropolitan Museum was an oasis of marble and soft lighting, a stark contrast to the shark tank outside. When Eleanor pushed the heavy door open, the sound of sobbing was immediate. It wasn't the polite, stifled crying of a socialite who had drunk too much champagne. It was the raw, gasping panic of a girl realizing she was in over her head. Sienna was leaning over the sink, splashing water on her face. Her pink tulle dress was dampened at the bodice, and her mascara had run in jagged streaks down her cheeks. She froze when she saw Elena in the mirror. Sienna straightened up, wiping her face frantically with a paper towel. She tried to summon the arrogance she had worn in the penthouse, but it was gone. In its place was fear. "Come to gloat?" Sienna spat, though her voice wavered. "Go ahead. Tell me I'm stupid. Tell me I'm a homewrecker." Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She walked to the adjacent sink and calmly washed her hands, drying them on a linen towel. She looked at Sienna in the mirror. She didn't see a rival. She saw a casualty. "I didn't come to gloat, Sienna," Elena said softly. "I came to give you an exit strategy." Sienna blinked, confused. "What?" "Julian is drowning," Elena said, turning to face her. "That article outside, it's just the first domino. By tomorrow morning, the SEC will be freezing assets. By Monday, the board will vote to remove him. And when men like Julian sink, they look for flotation devices. Usually they use the people closest to them." Sienna shook her head. "He loves me. We're partners." "He doesn't have partners, Sienna. He has assets and liabilities. Right now, you're an asset because you make him look virile. But tomorrow, when the press is camping on his lawn and the FBI is seizing his hard drives, you'll be a liability, or worse, a scapegoat." Eleanor took a step closer. The vanilla perfume was still there, but now it smelled like desperation. He'll say you knew, Elena continued, her voice clinical but not cruel. He'll say you signed papers you didn't read. He'll say the extravagant trips and the jewelry were your idea, that he was just trying to keep his high-maintenance girlfriend happy while he struggled to save the company. He will rewrite the narrative, and you will be the villain. Sienna looked horrified. He wouldn't. He bought me this dress. With a company credit card? Elena raised an eyebrow. That's embezzlement, Sienna, and you're wearing the evidence. Sienna looked down at the pink tulle as if it were on fire. She started to hyperventilate. What do I do? She whispered. I don't have anywhere to go. I gave up my apartment. I quit my job at the agency. Elena reached into her clutch. She pulled out a card. It wasn't a business card. It was a key card to a hotel suite at the Carlisle. Go there, Eleanor said, placing the card on the marble counter. Stay the night. Don't call him. Don't answer his texts. In the morning, call the number written on the back. It's a lawyer, not one of Julian's. He'll help you draft a statement distancing yourself from Vance Corp before the indictment drops. Be the victim, Sienna, not the accomplice. Sienna stared at the card. Then she looked at Elena, her eyes wide with confusion. Why? Sienna asked. I stole your husband. Eleanor smoothed the velvet of her dress. You didn't steal him, Sienna. You took out the trash. I'm just making sure you don't get dirty carrying the bags. Eleanor turned and walked to the door. Eleanor. She paused, hand on the brass handle. Thank you, Sienna whispered. Eleanor didn't look back. Run, Sienna, before the music stops. When Elena returned to the Temple of Dendur, the mood had shifted from anxiety to open chaos. Waiters were still circulating with plates of filet mignon, but no one was eating. The hum of conversation had risen to a roar. Every screen in the room, phones, tablets, was glowing with the same news. The Ledger article had been updated. Now the New York Times had picked it up. Vance Corp under investigation. Whistleblower leaks suggest massive Ponzi scheme. Julian was standing near the head table, cornered. Arthur Sterling was shouting at him, his face purple with rage. Two other board members were flanking Julian, gesturing wildly. Julian looked like an animal caught in a trap. He was sweating, his tie loosened, his eyes darting around the room looking for an escape, looking for an ally. He saw Elena. She was standing next to Elias near a towering Egyptian statue. Elias had his arm around her waist, a protective, possessive claim. They looked calm. They looked like the only two steady things in a world that was spinning off its axis. Julian pushed past Arthur Sterling. He stumbled toward them, knocking over a chair. The room went silent as people realized the confrontation was happening. The cameras, which had been lowered, snapped back up. You! Julian snarled, pointing a shaking finger at Elena. You did this. You leaked the files. Elena didn't flinch. She took a sip of her champagne. I don't know what you're talking about, Julian, she said coolly. I signed a non-disclosure agreement, remember? I haven't said a word to the press. Don't play games with me, Julian shouted, his voice cracking. These files, the metadata, they came from the home server. Only 2 people had access to that server, me and you. And the IT director, Elias interjected smoothly. Who, if I recall, you fired without severance 3 months ago. People talk, Julian, especially when you stop paying them to be quiet. It was a lie, of course. Elias had cracked the server himself, but it was a plausible lie, a lie that sowed doubt. You're trying to ruin me, Julian hissed, stepping into Elena's personal space. I made you. You were nothing before me, a receptionist at a gallery. I gave you this life. You gave me a cage, Elena said, her voice rising just enough to carry to the nearby tables. And you charged me rent for it every single day. I'll sue you, Julian spat. I'll sue you for defamation. I'll bury you in legal fees until you're begging on the street. Elena laughed. It was a dark, genuine sound. With what money, Julian? The question hung in the air. Your assets are being frozen as we speak, Elena said, stepping forward, forcing Julian to take a step back. The banks are calling in the loans. The board is drafting your resignation. You don't have the capital to buy a coffee, let alone a lawsuit. Julian stared at her. He looked at the crowd. He saw the faces of the people he had spent years trying to impress. They weren't looking at him with admiration anymore. They were looking at him with disgust, with pity. He looked around for Sienna. "Sienna!" he yelled, spinning around. "Where is she? Sienna!" "She's gone, Julian," Eleanor said quietly. She left. Julian looked at the empty space where his trophy should have been. The final prop had fallen. He looked back at Eleanor. His eyes were wet. For a second, just a second, the mask slipped completely, and she saw the terrified boy beneath the tyrant. "Elle," he whispered, pleading, "help me, please, we can fix this. I can explain it. It was for us. It was all for us." It was the most pathetic thing she had ever heard. "There is no us, Julian," Elena said. "There is just you, and the consequences of your own noise." She turned to Elias. "I'm bored. Take me home." Elias nodded. He cast one final withering look at his former partner. "Checkmate, Julian." They turned and walked away. Behind them, the sound of flashbulbs exploded again, blinding and relentless. But this time, they weren't capturing a king. They were documenting a carcass. As they reached the exit, two men in dark suits with earpieces walked past them, heading straight for Julian. "Mr. Vance?" one of them said, flashing a badge. "FBI, we need to have a conversation." Eleanor didn't look back. She walked out into the cool New York night, the air tasting sweet and clean. The sun rose over Brooklyn with a brilliance that felt apologetic. Elena sat on the balcony of the Red Hook loft, wrapped in a blanket, holding a mug of coffee. Her phone was on the table. It had been buzzing non-stop for 8 hours. Texts from friends she hadn't heard from in years. Emails from galleries asking if she was interested in curating. A voicemail from her mother, who had always adored Julian, asking what on earth was going on. She hadn't answered any of them. Inside, the TV was on low volume. The news was running a continuous loop of Julian's arrest. The footage showed him being led out of the Met in handcuffs, his tuxedo jacket thrown over his head to hide his face. "The fall of the Vance Empire," the Chiron read. Elias walked out onto the balcony. He was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair messy from sleep. He looked softer in the daylight. He sat down next to her, resting his elbows on his knees. "It's done," he said. "It's done," Elena echoed. She felt hollow. She had expected to feel triumphant. She had expected to feel a surge of joy. Instead, she just felt tired. It was the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a heavy weight for a very long time and had finally set it down. "Are you okay?" Elias asked, studying her profile. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "I spent so long hating him. I spent so long planning this. Now that he's gone, I don't know who I am without the anger." Elias reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm and solid. "You're Elena," he said. "Just Elena. You're not Julian's wife. You're not his victim, and you're not his executioner anymore. You're just free. Free." The words settled over her. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" Elias smiled, looking out at the skyline where the World Trade Center glinted in the distance. "Now we watch the dust settle, we testify when they need us to, and then we build something new." "We?" Eleanor asked, looking at him. Elias turned to her. His eyes were guarded, but hopeful. "If you want there to be a we." Eleanor looked at the man who had given her the weapons to fight her war. She saw the patience in his eyes, the respect. She realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't being asked to fit into a mold. She was being asked what she wanted. She squeezed his hand. "I think," Eleanor said slowly, a real smile touching her lips, I'd like that. But the story wasn't quite over. Because while Julian was in a cell, the wreckage he left behind was vast, and in the debris of an empire, there are always scavengers. Elena's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a friend or a reporter. It was a text from Marcus Gower, Julian's shark of a lawyer. Ms. Vance, we need to talk. There is a secondary ledger, and it has your signature on it. Eleanor stared at the screen. The cold dread that had vanished the night before came rushing back. She showed the phone to Elias. He read it, his expression darkening. "He's bluffing," Elias said, "trying to drag you down with him." "Or," Elena whispered, "Julian had one last trapdoor I didn't know about." She stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. The war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new battlefield. "Get the laptop," Elena said, her voice hard again. "We have work to do." The Silent Divorce, a novel of reclamation. The threat from Marcus Gower sat on the coffee table like a physical weight. "There is a secondary ledger, and it has your signature on it." Elena paced the length of the loft, the warmth of the morning sun doing nothing to dispel the chill in her bones. "I signed so many things," she said, her voice tight. "Julian would put stacks of papers in front of me before dinner, tax forms, trust documents, insurance policies. He'd say, 'Just administrative nonsense, Elle. Sign here so we can eat.'" Elias was already at his workstation, 3 monitors casting a blue glow over his focused face. "That's the oldest trick in the white-collar crime book, the spousal shield. He buries the illegal assets in a trust under your name, gets you to sign it blindly, and if the feds ever come knocking, he claims he was just a consultant and you were the owner." "If that ledger is real," Eleanor said, stopping behind his chair, "I'm not just a witness, I'm a co-conspirator. I could go to prison." "You're not going to prison," Elias growled, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. "Julian is arrogant. He thinks he's the only one who understands how data works. He thinks deleting a file makes it disappear." "What are you looking for?" "Ghosts," Elias muttered. "If he forged your signature, or if he altered the document after you signed it, there will be digital residue, a timestamp mismatch, a pixel variance in the scan, something." Elena watched him work. This was the other side of the power dynamic she had never seen with Julian. Julian hoarded information. Elias weaponized it to protect her. Hours ticked by. The silence in the loft was heavy, punctuated only by the hum of the servers and the distant wail of sirens in Manhattan. Elena felt a familiar paralysis creeping in, the urge to be small, to hide, to let the men handle the world. No, she thought. That woman died on the steps of the Met. She went to her bag and pulled out the burner phone she had used to coordinate with Elias. She dialed Marcus Gower's number. Elias stopped typing. He spun his chair around. "What are you doing?" "Elena," Marcus answered on the second ring. His voice was smooth, oily. "I assume you're ready to discuss terms. We can keep this secondary ledger out of the FBI's hands, provided you recant your statement about the servers." "I'm not recanting anything, Marcus," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "Then I'm afraid your signature on the Cayman accounts will look very bad to a federal grand jury. Ignorance is not a legal defense, Mrs. Vance." "It's Ms. Vance," Eleanor corrected. "And I'm not calling to negotiate. I'm calling to set a meeting. 1 hour. The Battery Park Ferry Terminal. Come alone." "Elena, don't," Elias started. She held up a hand to silence him. "I'll be there," Marcus said, and the line went dead. Elena lowered the phone. She looked at Elias. "Find the proof." "But I need to look him in the eye. I need to finish this myself." Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'll have it. Just don't sign anything." The wind off the harbour was biting, whipping Elena's coat around her legs as she stood by the railing of the ferry terminal. The Statue of Liberty was a pale green smudge in the distance, a silent observer to the final act of her marriage. Marcus Gower approached her holding a leather briefcase. He looked out of place among the tourists and commuters, his Italian suit too sharp, his expression too grim. "You picked a dramatic spot," Marcus said, leaning against the railing next to her. "I like the air," Elena said. "It clears the head." Marcus sighed, placing the briefcase on the ground. "Look, Elena, I don't want to see you in jail. Julian is volatile, but he protected himself. This ledger creates a direct link between you and the shell companies used to launder the zoning bribes. It shows you as the primary beneficiary." "Let me see it," Elena said. Marcus hesitated, then unlocked the briefcase. He pulled out a thick binder and flipped it open. There, in black and white, was a transfer deed for an offshore holding company, and at the bottom, in blue ink, was her signature. Elena Marie Vance. It looked real. It looked exactly like her hand. "Julian is willing to make a deal," Marcus said. "You claim the server leak was a fabrication by a disgruntled employee, Elias. You say you were manipulated. In exchange, this ledger disappears." Eleanor stared at the signature. She remembered the day. It was their 10th anniversary. Julian had been so sweet that morning. He had brought her breakfast in bed, and then casually a stack of papers. "Just some updates for the life insurance, darling, for our future." She felt a hot tear of rage prick her eye. He had framed her on their anniversary. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Once. It was the signal from Elias. Elena looked up at Marcus. She closed the binder. "You know what the problem is with Julian, Marcus?" she asked. "He thinks everyone is as greedy as he is, and he thinks everyone is as sloppy." "I don't follow," Marcus said, checking his watch. "Elias found the metadata," Elena said calmly. "You see, Julian scanned my signature from the insurance documents that day, but he got lazy. He digitally pasted it onto the ledger document. When you overlay the two signatures, they are a 100% pixel-perfect match. No human signs their name exactly the same way twice. It's a physical impossibility. It's a digital forgery." Marcus's face went pale. He knew the law. He knew that presenting a forged document to federal investigators wasn't just a tactic. It was a felony. "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, stepping closer, "Elias found the email thread where Julian instructed you to prepare the contingency file. That makes you an accessory to fraud and forgery, Marcus." Marcus gripped the railing. His knuckles were white. The shark had just realized he was in the water with a bigger predator. "What do you want?" Marcus rasped. "I want the original ledger," Elena said. "I want the file destroyed, and then I want you to go to the district attorney and cut a deal. You testify against Julian. You tell them everything, the bribes, the hidden accounts, the forgery." "He'll kill me," Marcus whispered. "Professionally." "He's already dead, Marcus," Elena said. "The only question is, are you going to be buried in the same grave?" She held out her hand. Marcus looked at her. He looked at the briefcase. Then, with a defeated slump of his shoulders, he handed her the binder. "You're terrifying," Marcus muttered. "I learned from the best," Eleanor replied. She took the binder and dropped it into the nearest trash can. "Go, before I change my mind." She watched him walk away, a broken man in an expensive suit. She turned back to the water, took a deep breath, and finally, truly, exhaled. The gallery in Chelsea was packed. The walls were stark white, a perfect canvas for the chaotic, vibrant, abstract pieces that hung on them. The exhibition was titled Silence Broken. Elena stood in the center of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water. She wore a white suit, sharp and tailored. Her hair was cut into a chic bob. She looked younger, lighter. "It's a sellout," a voice said behind her. She turned to see Elias. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo or a black turtleneck. He was wearing a simple grey blazer and jeans. He looked relaxed, happy. "The critics are calling it raw and uncomfortably honest," Elena smiled. "I think that's a compliment." "It is," Elias said, handing her a program. Julian's sentencing was on the news an hour ago. Elena's smile didn't falter, but her eyes grew serious. How long? 15 years, Elias said. No parole for at least 10. The forgery charge you pinned on him was the nail in the coffin. The judge called it a sociopathic betrayal of trust. 15 years. By the time Julian got out, the world would have moved on. He would be an old man with no empire, no legacy, and no one to blame but himself. Do you feel... Elias trailed off. Sad, Elena finished. A little, for the time wasted. But mostly, I feel indifferent. He's just a ghost now, Elias. A story I used to tell. She looked around the room. She saw Sienna near the back. The girl looked different. Less makeup, modest clothes. She was studying a painting of a storm. She caught Elena's eye and gave a small, tentative wave. Elena nodded back. Sienna had testified. She had found her own voice too. You did this, Elias said, gesturing to the room, to the life she had built. You built this. We built this, Elena corrected. She stepped closer to him. The chemistry between them had settled into a steady, warm burn. It wasn't the frantic, desperate clinging of two drowning people anymore. It was the solid foundation of two people standing on dry land. I have a new project, Elias murmured, leaning down. I bought that old brownstone in the village, the one with the garden you liked. It needs work, a lot of work. I'm good at renovations, Elena said, reaching up to fix his collar, a habit she no longer fought. I'm good at taking broken things and making them beautiful. I know, Elias said. He kissed her, right there in the middle of the gallery, in front of the press and the patrons and the art. It wasn't a performance. It was a promise. Elena pulled back, smiling against his lips. The camera flashes went off, but she didn't blink. She didn't look away. She turned toward the light, ready to be seen. The silence was over, and the music was just beginning. And so, Elena Vance didn't just survive her divorce. She rewrote the ending. She proved that while silence can be a shield, eventually you have to drop the shield and pick up the sword. Julian Vance lost his empire because he underestimated the quiet woman in the corner. He forgot that the most dangerous person in the room is the one who listens, watches, and waits. Montage of Elena smiling in her gallery, the newspaper headline of Julian's sentencing, and finally Elena and Elias walking hand in hand down a New York street, fading to black. What did you think of Elena's revenge? Was it justice, or did she go too far? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes silence is just the calm before the storm.